I think we might kick off. So good afternoon, everybody. My name is Kristen. I'm one of the co-founders of Humn, and I would like to welcome everybody here today. I know that we're meeting from various lands around the country, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And so first of all, I would like to also welcome our amazing panelists that we have here today. Before I introduce them, I just wanted to let you know, Bernie and I are actually sitting on the Gold Coast in the casino. We're actually at a conference, and so we couldn't find a breakout room. So we're sitting together. So if there is any noise in the background, we apologise. We're sort of having to wing this one a little bit from up here. Yeah, so anyway, we'll manage. Yeah. For anybody that has just dialed in, please just pop your phones onto, or your systems onto mute if you're not on mute. And at any time, also please feel free to pop any questions through in the chat that you may have, and we will be getting certainly to those questions as well for you. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about when the risk is behavioural, leadership is the control, why your safety strategy must start at the top. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to our wonderful panelists. So the first one I would like to introduce you to is Bernie Doyle, who's sitting next to me here. Welcome, Bernie.
Hi, everyone.
Secondly is Professor Jane Burns. Welcome, Jane, and thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everybody.
And last but not least is Martyn Campbell, who is also one of the co-founders of Humn with me. So welcome, Martyn.
Thank you. Morning, afternoon, everyone.
It does feel a bit like morning, doesn't it? Okay, so I think we're really kind of wanting to understand a little bit more about why these behavioural risks are now considered one of the most critical threats to organisational safety, and what has shifted in the last 3 to 5 years in bringing this into sharp focus. So this is really for any of the panel that would like to actually answer that, or you each feel free to answer that. So what do you think has shifted in the last 3 to 5 years?
For me, I think the impact of psychosocial really has made a significant impact on many businesses. I'm starting to see it now also in Asia Pacific. Bearing in mind with the POSHO, just so a quick background. So we're an organisation of about 40 spread across Southeast Asia, predominantly all non-for-profits, all focused upon OHS. Interestingly enough, we did a survey 10 years ago, which went out to all of our members, and we asked them to list their top 5 issues that they were faced with. The idea at the time is we would put together a central training session that would address those issues. And we didn't do the training because it came too hard because of culture and languages. The interesting point was we just did that same survey again last year, and 10 years ago, psychosocial or mental health did not register as an issue. This time round, it was number 1 by a million miles. So that impact has then, I believe, forced organizations to look at aspects beyond just the physical side and dealing with the psychosocial. And we can come back to it later, but I think that's a significant part that leadership will play upon that as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Jane, anything that you would like to add?
I might jump in. I, as you guys know, and for the audience, I led a well and productive CRC, which is focused on psychosocial risk and psychological safety for 4 years. We didn't get funding, but back then it was just really obvious that the costs were increasing, exponentially, and that regulators were coming in, businesses were going broke. It was impacting on the bottom line. That's the negative aspect of it. The positive of it was that actually, if you focused on psychological safety and psychosocial risk management and reduce those risks and actually enhanced worker well-being and ensured that people loved coming to work and doing the job that they did, that you'd actually get better productivity gains. So those 2 things, I think, that was kind of nice. That was nice conversations at executive and board levels. And then all of a sudden, I think, bam, you know, the reality is if you don't act on it and if you don't start to think about mitigating your risks and promoting work well-being, you're going to go to jail or you're going to get a great big fat fine. And I think that is now the big stick. And so I'm always proactive, positive, and I like to think that we should be far more proactive in our approach. But the reality is people are now reacting, and the reactions are not cutting the mustard, really.
Great, thank you. And Martyn, anything from you?
Yeah, I think people are now in a phase of just wondering what to do. The legislation's been around in Australia a couple of years, and there's been a lot of sort of webinars and talk around sort of what the legislation is, but there's not a lot of people explaining what good looks like, which is why we've sort of come in. And I think Bernie's right. This is getting bigger. So about 4 weeks ago, I was in Taiwan, speaking at a conference, but also working with the OHS regulator over there. So Taiwanese government are introducing psychosocial safety legislation there. They have a huge bullying problem, which surprised me from a cultural perspective. But so they're writing new legislation and they want it to be usable. And also the regulator is looking at sort of their capabilities. How do they actually deal with these? Like, how do you receive a complaint, and then how do you triage it? How do you allocate it to an inspector, and what skills that they have? So it's not going away. It's definitely getting bigger, and it's spreading across Asia. There are still some naysayers, I think, who don't really believe it. Jump on LinkedIn, you'll see them all the time. It should be a HR issue. It's nothing to do with safety. Well, maybe that was the thinking a few years back, but my view is a bit different now.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because it really does need to be a focus with HR and work health and safety. It can't be, you know, these ones. It needs to be a how do we get hand in glove and work together to work out how we sort through this. Yeah, thank you. Bernie, this one's for you. So many work health and safety frameworks still treat behaviour as an outcome rather than as a risk. What are some of the dangers of this type of thinking, and how can we reframe it so that behaviour is actually something that the leaders must focus on?
I mean, from a personal point of view, I can never understand why leaders don't understand that good safety is good business. And we all know with the impact of the premiums that are forced upon you, why leaders actually don't step out and turn around and say, there's actually a better way of doing this, which gives benefits to the whole organization, and particularly to the people there. I mean, people like to be cared, they like to be treated as individuals, but also we don't acknowledge the fact that they're a team as well. They want to be part of the whole process. And for some reason, there still is a group of ancient leaders who look and turn around and say, oh no, that's not the role of what I'm supposed to do as a leader. I mean, leaders should be giving the best examples. I mean, I know it's an old allergy now, management by walking about. I mean, it was out there many, many years ago. And I've seen great examples of really good leadership, but I've also seen some examples of shocking leadership where it's really a hierarchical, it's a very demonstrative position they put themselves into. Where I think we are starting to say, and it would be disappointing if leaders did this because it was being forced upon them, rather than do it because they realize it's the right thing to do. So the more that it's now, if you like, pushed in their face, in some cases you have to do that, hopefully they will react, and maybe we'll start to see the change that needs to be. Mark was quite right. What's, I think, lacking, and maybe it's not so much now, is where do leaders look for that inspiration? You know, what do I do? A number of them struggle. They clearly can deal with physical side, because that's must be easier. They can deal with audits that actually are physical based. They can walk outside, so I can do an audit on my factory, I can tick this. What they struggle with is dealing with an individual who is having problems that they can't come to grips with. But it's going to change. It has to change. And I think the framework that you're working through, where you've identified the hazards, is the first big step that these reluctant leaders need to cotton on to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Thank you. Actually, that might be a really good segue into a question for you, Jane. So we know that there's chronic stress, burnout, and poor leadership behaviours have a neurological and psychological toll on businesses and people. Can you explain the impacts of this unsafe leadership that it has on mental fitness and overall team performance for us, please?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm glad that you put the 17 social hazards up. So there's two things I want to just, because you've got a lot in that question. There's two things. I want to talk about burnout and stress, and then I want to talk about the science of well-being. And if I start with burnout and stress, it's too late. So what you're seeing at the moment is a lot of reactionary approaches from workplaces, and we've been seeing them. I've been working in workplace wellbeing for 20 plus years. It's putting in place the EAP, it's the mental health first aid training, it's awareness raising, it's, all, and people think that they're doing a great job, but that does not address psychosocial risks and hazards. So when we talk about the science of well-being, we talk about what's the evidence and how do you actually use that evidence to improve mental health and well-being. And there's a thing called a continuum of mental health, and I won't bore you with the details, but effectively what it says is there are risk factors and there are protective factors. Now, these are hazards, right? But risk factors and real leadership is about understanding how to manage your psychosocial hazards. But for people themselves, the blame's always been put on people. Oh, it's burnout, it's stress. You haven't been able to manage it. You need to be more resilient. You need to be this, you need to be that. Well, actually, when you think about all of these hazards, and then the impact that has on workers, the things that you see earlier before it becomes burnout and stress, and this is where I think the real focus should be on proactive preventative approaches, is both physical and mental. So when we talk about the physical impact and the mental impact, you don't differentiate your mind and your body, right? So the things that you see, and we'll all have experienced this, sleep disturbance, increased reliance sore muscles, sore body, sore neck. I know the guys from Desk Coach are on. They're things that are actually early symptoms, making mistakes, shortness of temper. And there's some of the things that then lead to psychosocial hazards. And we talk about cumulative risk. That's what it is, which then leads to stress and burnout. Too late. Once it's there, it's much harder to treat. And then, and again, this is a lot of the work that we did with Defence and Veterans Affairs. You see this, and it's in the transition report, which is a big survey of Defence personnel and veterans. It then becomes and manifests as mental illness, anxiety, depression, PTSD. And we've somehow put everything into the same bucket and created a medical model, which is put your hand up to seek help for it. Well, actually, as people become unwell, they're far less likely to put their hand up to seek help. And so if we don't start to get ahead of the curve and start to think about what are the proactive, preventative things that we can do, we are never going to solve this problem, which then brings me, and I'll finish on this, the science of well-being. You've got a massively saturated market with every man and his dog peddling something. Smart leaders need to ask the question, what data can I use to inform the interventions that I choose? And how do I measure what actually is making a difference? Because if they're not doing that, they're just putting their hand up and putting up, Band-Aid solutions. When we talk about the science of well-being, and it's a real science, and I've worked really closely with Paula Robinson, who did her PhD on mental fitness, you're actually talking about what it means to create mentally fit and resilient workers and workplaces, which doesn't take away from the management of psychosocial risk, but it's a proactive preventative approach. And we think it's the way to go because, like physical fitness, you don't suddenly go out and run a marathon and expect to win. You have to build up those habits. And there's lots of evidence of the ways that you can do that. And you can do it in a way that actually builds team, it builds flexibility, it builds all of the things that we talk about in psychologically strong, mentally fit and healthy work environments, which include both the individual, the leadership, but also then the built environment. So how do you actually build environments that actually promote mental fitness and well-being? So that's a long answer to lots of bits of the question, but they're the things that we sort of try to break down as we have conversations with leaders about what do you mean when you talk about workplace well-being?
Fantastic. I could see Sam sitting there nodding her head profusely. Yep. So for anyone that's not aware, Sam is also on the call. Sam is one of the other fabulous co-founders of Humn, and she's doing all of my tech pretty much behind the scenes for me today to help me coordinate this webinar. So yeah, thank you, Sam. Martyn, this question is for you. So have you seen firsthand how poor leadership enables psychosocial harm? And what are some of the biggest leadership failures that you've encountered, and what were the consequences of those failures?
Oh, right. A couple that jumped to mind. So I think, first of all, as a former regulator, when I was heading up Safe Work SA, I used to ask the senior leadership about what they were doing about the risks and hazards relevant to their business. So generally, the vast majority of senior leadership's group had no idea what psychosocial safety was. Many of them didn't even really understand the physical risk management framework. But in relation to psych safety, most definitely they didn't understand it. So the general answer you would get is, oh, we've got an EAP program. Right? So EAP programs are an important part of the solution, but they are not a preventative control. So they're to deal with the react after something bad has happened, and also there's varying qualities of them. So depending on the injury of the individual, depends on whether they would need a counsellor or a psychologist or a psychiatrist. So EAP programs are part of the solution. If that's all you've got, you're probably not doing enough. So I would ask leadership about what their risk landscape was and what they were doing to eliminate and control those hazards. It goes back to what Jane said. It was around thinking carefully and deeply about your control strategies. So you've got to pick them that are relevant to your risks in your organisation. So don't just go with the first person that comes along with a resilience program and then think that you're all good, because you're probably not. The other thing is active leadership on the ground. So it's one thing to say for leaders to say that they do things. It's another thing to be able to demonstrate that they're actively doing them. So there was a prosecution I made a few years back now. Anyone in South Australia might know about it, but there was a young electrician, an apprentice electrician, who was set on fire in the meal room by colleagues, and the colleagues put it down to hijinks, and they were subject to hijinks and pranks when they were apprentices, so they were passing it down the line. But the behaviour over a period of time included locking the apprentice in a container, gluing his tools together, hiding his tools, putting mastic in his hair, taping him to a chair and leaving him there. And eventually it escalated to one day somebody squirted lighter fluid on him and set him on fire. Luckily, he wasn't injured, but nonetheless, pretty bad. The point of that case was not only the terrible bullying behaviour of the apprentice and a young worker, but it was the fact that the behaviour was undertaken by supervisors, and other supervisors witnessed it and did nothing to stop it. So those supervisors, we prosecuted them individually. We prosecuted the organisation, but we also prosecuted the leadership individually, because you've got to make a stand, and that stand requires you to take action and intervene when wrongdoing occurs. So you can't be an idle bystander in this situation. You've got to get off your backside and actually walk the talk and do something about it. So what I say to leaders is understand your risk landscape, think deeply about the solutions you put in place, walk the talk, get out on the ground in the site, and make sure people are actually doing what they should be doing, and set the standards and values that you expect others to follow through with.
Great, thank you. Bernie, question for you. So obviously working across Asia Pacific, you'd see a whole lot of things. What are some of the emerging best practices in embedding leadership and leader-led behavioural controls and safety systems into, that policy and practice level?
I'd love to say I'm witnessing lots of them, but unfortunately, I'm not. I think with many of our members, and again, we're a cross section right across from, let me think, we go as far west as Mauritius, and we go as far east as Japan, and we go north to Kazakhstan, and we go south to Australia. So that's the encompass. And then we throw in some members from from Europe and North America. And to be honest, there's nothing dramatic that my members are reporting to me. We've obviously seen some great examples from the physical side. And Martyn, you can, remember Engineer Ho in Singapore, when Ministry of Manpower there just went out, I think after an incident at the dockyard where over 100 workers were killed. And the Singapore government just said enough's enough, and they just clamped down. And now I think they would set a world record as far as their improvements and what they've been able to do to reduce fatalities. The next stage is then dealing with, I think, the psychosocial, which is the non-physical. I'm not seeing much that's coming out of it, to be honest. I think, Martyn, you said the regulators in Taiwan, they understand it. So my analogy of this is, if you think back to those old cowboy films, and the white people used to be in the corral with their covered wagons, and they'd form a circle, and the Indians would go round and round and round. I think that's what's happening in Southeast Asia at the moment. I think people are going round and round and round. They know there's an issue. What I think they struggle with is, how do I address that issue? I think, honestly, the culture aspect of Southeast Asia doesn't lend itself to the leadership taking grasp of it. I think the more Anglo-Saxon, American, European leadership can embrace that aspect. But I don't know, with some of the organizations I've seen in the likes of China and places like this, it's too hierarchical, and you just I can't see a senior leader in China actually being considerate of some of the non-physical aspects his workers may be faced. So I think anything that allows them to have I'll call it an audit, because it's what it is, anything that would allow a leader to turn around and say, okay, let me admit I'm not sure where to start. I do need a tool. I need something to do it. And honestly, when Martyn first mentioned about the issues that you've raised, I think if I was back in industry again, I would grasp this with two hands and turn around and say, this addresses an issue that I know is there, but I'm not sure how to deal with it.
Great, thank you.
It's funny because the last couple of years I've been working with a lot of executive groups in this space. And there were two reasons why I work with those groups. Firstly, the CEO and leadership group generally want to do the right thing, so they want to learn. But then the other driver for me working with those groups is because the executive group doesn't believe or trust the safety leadership. So I get a lot of general managers of safety functions saying, can you help me break through the ceiling? Because I'm just not getting traction on the change. Now, rightly or wrongly, why executives wouldn't believe their safety team is beyond me. However, they believe me. So I come with a level of credibility and being a regulator and lawyer and prosecuting people. So I go in and help them understand in a crystal clear way what their duties were and what the expectations are, and what good looks like and what bad looks like. And I do that through a sort of ethical, moral approach. This is the right thing to do to care for people, but then it's also around a legal compliance and a financial approach. If you get it wrong, these things are really expensive and you probably haven't budgeted for it. That grabs the attention of CFOs quite a bit. And then what that does is that sort of removes the barrier and allows the safety team to steam ahead with it. And when you look at what controls look like, you look at that screen there and you see the 17 hazards. Like a lot of those are behavioural. Now, Glenn Farrell, who's a regulator in South Australia who took over after me, he said a couple of times, and other regulators have said the same, that if you just tackle this through the safety team or the HR team, you're destined to failure. It's got to be both. So what good looks like for me is in putting controls in place around some of these behavioural aspects. Is about leadership, and it's leadership at the very top. So it's about getting executive group alignment, and then working through the management and the supervisory and ultimately the worker level, but doing it collaboratively, giving people insights into who they are and how they act. Some people don't know that they're bullies. Some people think it's normal, and until you show them a mirror and allow them to change or exit, then you're probably not going to get a lot of traction.
Yeah, and I think you're right, Martyn. The challenge is also we've got a lot of leaders that we work with, as you know, that have learned their leadership style from people that have been in leadership roles for a very long time. And unfortunately, they've been taught not great leadership attributes from a behavioural point of view. They've been taught how to be technical leaders, but not necessarily how to be human caring leaders. And so it's that learned behaviour, isn't it? And learned leadership. Jane, I'm just going to move back to you. So in your view, what is the role of an emotionally intelligent leader, and how do they then work to control those risks and enhance the psychosocial safety aspects in a team?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm not laughing at Martyn's commentary. I love listening to him because he just presents some of the most obvious, this is just bad behavior, but the look in the mirror and look at what my behaviors are doing and the impact it's having, I think is just such an obvious one. I remember when I first started in my career, and it was pretty stock standard to be called an effing idiot at least once a week. And now you go, oh, well, that would never happen. And so when I reflect on emotional leadership, and again, lots of evidence across academic land, but what does it actually mean in practice? So if I think about poor leadership, and we've touched on it, and Bernie touched on it a little bit, but it's either they're complacent, so it's not a workplace issue. I've heard people say this, mental health and wellbeing is not my issue. It's something that needs to be dealt with outside of the workplace. Or there's nothing to see here. Our workplace is fine and we don't have an issue or a problem because it's not showing up in any of our data. And it's like, well, what data are you actually using? Oh, we're using a pulse check and, blah, blah, blah. Then you get to the ignorant leader where they don't know what they don't know. And this is where my concern comes in around HR function and safety function, because they're very, very different functions. And the advice that they provide is very, very different. But how do you actually ensure that you are being informed by your leaders about the actions that you might take? And I think that's why we've seen such a proliferation of mental health first aid training, because that feels like, oh, this is the advice that I'm getting. Therefore, if I enact this and put it in place, I'm going to get the results that I should get around increasing my staff wellbeing. Or they're incompetent. And that's the one that probably makes me the most nervous, where they're not curious, they're not getting the right advice. If they do get the right advice, they're arrogant and they think that they know better. And, across the workplaces that I've worked with and across the workplaces that Paul has worked with and across, the environments that we've seen, and you can see it constantly, they might be great subject matter experts, but they're not experts in safety, mental health, and wellbeing. And those three things coming together around people and humans is what I think makes this such a unique offering. So then if I go to great leaders, and people talk a lot about emotional intelligence, I just think leadership is leadership, and we should be upskilling all of our people from the top right to the bottom. And this includes our young people as they're coming through, so that they start to learn the real skills around leadership. And again, it's so basic to say this, but use data to inform what you're doing in your practical application. There's so many policies, there's so many plans, there's so many frameworks. Oh my God, if I see another framework, I think I might have to stab myself in the eye. And it's true. And everyone's sort of confused and, well, gee, where do I go with this? Oh, I've got a policy for diversity, equity, inclusion. Well, are you actually implementing that policy? Or, oh yeah, I've got a workplace wellbeing strategy. well, did you measure if it actually made a difference or not? Is it evidence-based? So, and I think Martyn and I have talked about this a lot. Good leaders talk to their people. So in the legislation now, they say use data, measure, get out there and co-design with your people. Co-design your psychosocial approach to managing hazards and risks, and then continue to talk to your people. Don't just do the pulse survey and set and forget. Actually get out there and talk the talk, walk the walk. Because your people, if you create a psychologically safe environment, which is what good leadership and emotional leadership's about, intelligence and leadership, then people will talk. And if you don't, then they're not going to talk, they're going to leave. And that's where you see you see that massive exodus of young people in particular leaving workplaces because I don't want to work in this horrible, awful place that actually doesn't look after my mental health and well-being. They're actually voting with their feet and saying, I'm going to choose workplaces that prioritize mental health and well-being. So talking to the people, using data, I think innovation, and when I say innovation, everyone talks about innovation. Everyone thinks, oh, it just means more technology, or you've got to do, you've got to create new, wacky, weird ways of doing it. Actually, no, you just have to start to trial and test. There's so many incredible innovations out there in university land and in startup land, but people are quite afraid of it. And I'm sort of like, if you just put in place a simple, we call it sandbox, where you trial, you test, you continuously improve. If it doesn't work, get rid of it. Stop doing stupid things that don't work and stop wasting your money on stupid things that don't work. That's innovation. And then I think the final piece, which is written about a lot, but not spoken about a lot, is curiosity. So get ahead of the curve, talk to people who know the evidence, talk to people who know the science, talk to people who can help you be the best leader that you can possibly be, and be a mentor to young people. And Jana, and I'll quote her on this, she is one of probably the best leaders I've seen. And she says, if you don't have a young person mentoring you, because they are the knowledge brokers, they know what's going on. If you don't do that, then you're not a great leader. And they're the things, and I think in a nutshell, 5 minutes, that's what makes a great leader. And being brave enough to own your mistakes. Gee whiz, I didn't know this, but I've done everything in my power to address these 17 psychosocial hazards. Right. And I've done everything in my power to put in place proactive, preventative, evidence-based, whether it's people-focused or technology-focused or a combination of integrated models. That's where I think we'll see the real traction. That's where I think we'll start to see this movement taking place around really, truly person-centered, human-centered design.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Do you know, there was some research done in 2012 by Mei Li Lin. She was actually in Taiwan with me a few weeks ago. Now, she's Senior Vice President of DECRA in the US, but her and Rosa Carrillo did some research, and I think they looked at about 125 senior executives from large organizations across the US and asked them what the 3 top attributes of a highly performing organization is from a safety perspective. So what are the 3 safety attributes that senior leaders valued? The first one, they said, was a speak up reporting culture.
Yes.
And that was about having a psychologically safe work environment. The next one was about being authentic. And the third was a sense of belonging. So they actually said that if you, from a leadership perspective, and Human does a lot of work in this space, is around creating micro practices across those 3 attributes. So example being, from the psych safety perspective, if you want a reporting culture and a psychologically safe environment, start to give thanks and recognition publicly. Help others save face. So don't blame people. You can still hold them accountable for wrongdoing, but we don't apportion blame, because blame doesn't have any positive aspects other than it makes us feel good. And the third one is around like active listening for intent, not just the words that are saying. Ask for feedback and insist on dissenting views. So ask for people to give their alternative opinion. And there's sort of 5 behaviors people can start doing today, which will start to build psychological safety. So there are others in the authenticity and the belonging phase as well. But like some of the controls to these hazards aren't expensive and don't rely on a lot of technology solutions. It's around holding up the mirror, understanding yourself, giving feedback to leadership group, and then having a plan to start making incremental behavior changes that builds psychological safety and trust.
Yeah, thank you.
Just jump in with one final bit on that, because I think that's absolutely right. Until there's power differentials and people speak up and it's career limiting. So if you're going to have a speak up, listen up culture, you need to have different modes of allowing that speak up culture so that people who feel that they don't have the power and that they're going to be punished for it have capacity to speak up. I particularly, and again, this passion area of mine around disability, it's tough to speak up if you live with an experience or are neurodivergent, or you live with an experience anxiety, or you're actually, living with a mental illness. It's actually really tough to speak up, and it challenges every bone of your body. So we've got to get creative in the way in which we allow people to feel safe in spaces and to allow them to speak up.
Fantastic. Okay, we literally are down to 5 minutes in regards to being able to ask any questions. Sam, is there anything that you can see in the chat from a question point of view that needs to be asked? If not, I'm going to actually open it up to anybody that is courageous enough and feels safe enough to actually come off mute and ask any of the panelists a question. Don't think there is anything in the chat. No. Okay, I can't see anything in the chat. So what I might do then, if that's the case, is I will ask one final.
We have one question, Kristen, from Felix.
Okay, Felix, it was very interesting to hear developments across Asia Pacific. Are there any other countries developing similar? Over to the panelists.
Okay, there'd be a couple that are, shall we say, a step ahead. Hong Kong, there's some really good stuff coming out of Hong Kong, and South Korea. And I can only base that on the interaction that we have in, again, through Occupational. We have 3 member organizations in Hong Kong. One of them is linked to IOSH, so you would expect that they would tend to be more towards the front. And then there's 2 in South Korea, and certainly some of the papers that are issuing, trouble is they're all published in Korean, which means you've got to get them translated, and it loses a lot. But I think the main thing with those 2 jurisdictions is the first thing they've acknowledged that there's an issue, and therefore, at least if you acknowledge, you then go and search for the information and search for answers. From the others, maybe not. Maybe they'll get there. But those are the 2. I'm still in question about Singapore. Yeah, a lot of really good stuff on the physical aspects, but I'm not sure that they've yet got the head round what I call the non-physical aspects. For me, from a leadership point of view, my challenge would be just listen. From a leadership, if you listen, you learn, and hope from there you can turn that into some sort of action.
Great, thank you. Anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in. Felix, go and have a look at the International World Building Institute. They have a whole evidence base around how the built environment can reduce psychosocial risk. And it's more than just a wellbeing room. It's actually how holistically you can start to think about the environments in which people work. And you think, we tend to think about built environment, i.e. offices, but we're talking about everything from the nighttime economy to how do you actually create safe spaces for emergency services workers, right through to, what does it look like to actually build supportive, holistic approaches to psychosocial risk management that's not just about the individual or the leader, but is actually also about the built environment. I love that website because it's just so evidence focused, and you can search it up and it'll give you all of the great evidence across the world. Europe's doing some amazing stuff. The US, as you can imagine, is doing some pockets of excellence and some bad stuff as well. And Asia Pacific, I think, Bernie, to your point, Singapore is probably punching above its weight in that built environment.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, Jane, what we might do is grab those links from you, if that's okay. And then what we'll do is pop them onto our LinkedIn page so that if anybody wants to access them, we can actually share them on our LinkedIn page with people. So if you're not connected with us on LinkedIn, please jump onto LinkedIn and then connect with us on Human, and we'll share those links with you there. We have a couple of other questions. So the next one is, do you have any recommendations on how to tackle low levels of emotional intelligence / capability across a middle manager cohort specific to psychosocial safety, absent of brutal HR action? Sorry. Did anyone hear what Bernie just said? Brutal HR action. Yeah. Any other ideas or thoughts?
Oh, I'm a big fan of mentoring. So I think, you know, I mentioned young people mentoring middle management, but I think, again, people can be taught the skill set. Often you end up middle management and they've had bad leaders. And so they're just representing bad leadership that they've experienced themselves. And the structures are set up in ways that enable bad behaviour. So budgets aren't right, or the job description's not right, or there's siloed approaches. I mean, I just come back to mentoring conversations and making sure that you genuinely create psychologically safe environments.
Yeah, Martyn's just had an internet crisis where his
Wondered where he went.
his internet's just crashed, so that's why he's just vanished.
Needs to pay the bill.
Any thoughts on you in regards to that one at all?
Interesting with middle management. So just going back, I have to say this is in history, but one of the organizations I ran in Adelaide, we introduced lean manufacturing. This was back in 1992. And my whole 250 people, we were all trained and mentored by a group from America. And I always remember one of the guys that came across from the States. Now we'll refer to him as a shop floor operator, but he embraced lean manufacturing, the team aspect. He said to me, Bernie, you will get your greatest support from your team members, and you'll get your greatest resistance from your middle management because they feel threatened. So therefore, it's then a case of, so what do we do with these middle managers who feel threatened? Because for those people who understand about lean manufacturing, it actually takes a lot of that control away from middle management, and that's why they felt threatened and endangered, almost like a prehistoric dinosaur. So we had to work very hard in creating positions where they actually were, if you like, useful to the organization. They were no longer in that management role where they were telling people to do. So we then had to change them. And you're quite right, in some cases, they were mentored by the team rather than by themselves. And I'd most probably say we had a 50% success rate. Half of them stayed and became really great contributors to the organization. The other half, you know, that's not for me. I like being in a hierarchical structure where I got told what to do and therefore I can tell other people what to do. If you're asking me to contribute, not sure if that's for me. But those that stayed, it was interesting. We had a long session with them. What is my role now if I don't do the traditional middle management supervisor role? And what we came out with was a saying that said, you're an obstacle remover. Your job is to remove the obstacles that stop that team from improving. And then the light came on for a number of them, said, I can do that. Yeah, middle management is most probably the most difficult challenge of all.
Yeah, thank you. Another question here. How would you respond when discussing psychosocial safety with leaders, specifically the hazards and potential responses from employees, when the leaders' responses are, but it is all subjective? I can see the team think that, but I don't know how we break down the subjectiveness. Do you want to go with that one, Martyn, at all?
Yeah, cool. Sorry, guys, my home broadband just...
The joys of technology.
I know, it dumped me out. Look, I think 100% correct. There are leaders out there who just don't get it. There are leaders out there who do. They generally do want to do the right thing because it is the right thing, and they'll spend money to do it, which is fantastic. But at the moment, people need persuading. What I'm finding. So I generally flavour it around the data and the research. So as Jane said before, it's about coming up with a compelling story that's underpinned by data and evidence-based research. So it's the way I present it is a blend of ethics, morals. It's the right thing to do. Then a little bit around the legislation, duties and officer duties, and this is what you have to do because the law says, and then a little bit around the workers' comp themes and trends and data. So a little bit around the bottom line cost. There's some research available, and Jane sort of touched on it, around return on investment for different programs, and there's some research around about the return on investment or lack of it for some programs. So before you jump to putting a control strategy in place, just do a bit of research and digging. But when I find that when you build that narrative that touches on those three elements, it's more convincing, and it's more difficult for executives to say no when you approach it in those three ways. Yeah. That said, there are some people who are just dead set, die in the wool, don't care. And if you've got those sorts of people, probably seek is your answer, because it's probably not a great place to work if that's how people are viewing sort of workplace mental health and wellbeing.
Yeah, thank you. Tash, I think you've got a question. I know that you're in the car and can't type, so feel free to pop off, and we'll make this the last question, and then we'll head into wrap up.
No worries. Just a quick question. It actually sort of touches coincidentally a little bit on what you were saying just then, Martyn. I think it's interesting that there's sort of a divide that seems to be occurring in what is part of the legislation, so what's claimable under workers' comp or under the Workplace Health and Safety Act, versus what makes good business sense and they should do more under a social responsibility. And we're seeing that especially with, the changes in Victoria they've already gone through in relation to stress and burnout, and looks to be the same thing kind of happening in New South Wales, and with those co-payments going in. How do you think we encourage businesses and leaders to take responsibility, I don't know if that's the right word, but a proactive approach to that bit that is just the social responsibility of you should do it anyway?
Who would like to answer that one?
I'll jump in with a quick response, because I've never understood why we haven't been able to get the productivity argument across, which is if you support, and Google were amazing at this. Like, there's a case study, I did it in the executive MBA when I was teaching that up at the Sydney Business School. If you're actually investing in your people, creating so blah, 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 all the things we've talked about, you get a better productivity. So you make more money, you get more innovative ideas, you've got more engaged workers, you get less presenteeism, less absenteeism. You're actually, like, it's a business case, but it has never, ever, ever resonated. And I don't know why, and it just doesn't make any sense to me. But if I were, obviously it made sense to Google, and it makes sense to a lot of those companies that do take that approach. But the productivity gains are substantial. It's not just a moral, ethical, legal. It's actually productivity gains actually result in better outcomes for your business.
Yeah, very true. Very true. Okay, I'd like to thank the panel for coming along today and giving us your time to have a really brief discussion. I mean, we could sit and talk about this all day, but yeah, just a brief lunch and learn session in regards to some of the areas we need to be thinking about from a leadership point of view. And we hope that we've given you a few key takeaways. We've just got up a screen share at the moment for those that can see the screen around the human movement. So we are really passionate about creating a really strong movement around driving this change and looking at how we can have our leaders and our organisations start to think about the humans that work within each and every one of our businesses. So in joining the movement, it's all around gaining access to tools and insights and research and being able to be part of a community of people that can come together under a community of practice and actually talk about this stuff. So there are a couple of ways that you can join. There's obviously with the 2 offerings with individuals and corporates, you can pay annually or you can also pay monthly. If you're looking for the monthly payment option, we can also pop that again onto our LinkedIn page for anyone that would like to look at joining. We've got some incredible members that are starting to come on board. You'll start to see a few more announcements about some fairly large organisations that are joining in June. So watch this space for some of that. But once again, I'd just like to say thank you. And thank you, Sam, for driving in the background with all of the screens and bits and bobs that you're doing. And thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Jane. And thank you, Martyn. We hope that you all have a fantastic day. And if you need anything at all, please feel free to reach out to us, DM us on LinkedIn if you want to reach out. Make sure that you're following our pages, and we look forward to catching up with you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Bye.